Welcome, Revolutionaries. It's MK Bryan from EmpoweRx with our podcast, Revolutionaries. And I'm really excited today for our guest, Mike Greiner. And just want to welcome you to the podcast and love to hear about what makes you a revolutionary, because you certainly are a pioneer.
Well, thank you, and thanks for having me. This is really great. I've noticed a huge change in things from when I started out as a clinical entrepreneur back in 1996 to what we have here in terms of the evolution of technology and bringing us all together under one roof. And in this case, oftentimes we're looking to cut out that middleman. That seems to be the biggest question. From my perspective in my past, it was much different than today. And so what I did was, and maybe some of the listeners will feel the same way today as I did back then, is I'd sign up with an agency to take a travel gig. I'm really super excited about it. I did this about a year after getting out of school. And I took my first assignment. And it just so happened that as I was finishing up my documentation, an invoice came in on the fax at the job that I was working, and it just so happened to represent my hours and the pay rate to the agency. And I discovered that I was making less than half of that bill rate, which was disconcerting to me because they really didn't do anything other than line up line up the gig and line up some benefits and in an apartment, furnished apartment, all these things that ultimately you can do on your own in time. Right. So after that first year, I wanted to discover how I could go out on my own. So I developed my own LLC. I talked with an accountant to get all the financials lined up, and then I just started cold calling. Nobody likes that word. You don't like doing it. But what I would utilize were ads out of the magazines, which of course you can do now through ads on the internet. But I would cold call these ads. Oftentimes the ads were offered by agencies. So I'd be having discussions with these agencies, and lo and behold, after 5 or 10 minutes of vetting, I would get enough information, whether it's good or bad or indifferent, I would get enough information where I could triangulate where that job was. And it's just business, like, love, or hate it. But it was a means to an end by which I was developing my own strategies for cutting out the middleman, because there really wasn't anyone that was doing it that I knew of that I could pick their brain and get it done. I was just going about the best way I could. Right. So after successfully triangulating the where that gig was, I would then call the facility, and if you ever find yourselves in a position of doing so, you want to skip the HR department. You want to go right to the director of whatever department that you're going to be working in, and have a discussion about your availability and how you could help them and expedite their needs and also save them money. At that point, you'll know what level the director, the level of interest the director has, and you can formulate a plan. And then, of course, their EmpoweRx, they have a gazillion different resources by which to navigate contracts and negotiations and things of that nature. But for me, that was the start. From there, I also planted seeds with people that had ads out for full-time gigs. So I would call and see if I could help fill a void in the short term. And that process turned out to be very successful, and I was able to put it into a short form outline of what I needed to tackle to be able to get that next gig. And it became somewhat fluid, one into the other, into the next. And that's how I spent about the next 20 years. And being able to fulfill my own desire to work independently, pick my own gigs, and net better financial gain from it, and just learn to roll with the punches with, putting together your own furnishing packages with a place that you found, or corporate housing, or or Airbnb, whatever the case might be. It became a process that became easier over time after I replicated it.
Right.
And I love it. I never ever have it any different way. I really enjoy working independently like that. And across the years, over the years, I've met people that would ask questions about it, and I mentor them. And it's been numerous hours on the phone trying to steer them in the right direction. But what I like about EmpoweRx is that it's all right there for the taking. But you got to put in the work. You got to put in the work. So that's how I did it. That's how I put in my work, eons ago when I was doing this for myself. But MK, you're making it a lot easier for people to just be able to dig in and get their hands dirty right out of the gate. And that's what I really appreciate about y'all.
Yeah, and I love the encouragement of talking to you and learning about your journey every time we get to connect, because it just reinforces all of the things that we share and have been successful, whether it's us as EmpoweRx developing business for the community or individual clinician partners. You've got to be able to talk to those clinical directors. Don't worry about HR yet. Get that advocate to walk you through the door at HR, because they're going to just shut you down. And so I just love hearing that, and it just kind of reiterates and reignites, my fire to keep going, and keep spreading the word about this new way to work, which isn't really that new. It's just, in so many other industries, people have worked this way for years. Doctors have worked this way for years. So why not become financially, more lucrative with all of your skills that you bring to the table as a clinician, and take advantage of being a small business owner? Now, Mike, your background is occupational therapy, and I'm
Yes.
curious, when you were working, when you first started out, and were doing those cold calls, obviously the world was a lot different, just with technology and I think accessibility. I know from me working in business, in the past 25 years, I've seen such a shift in communication as
Oh,
email has come in, and all that kind of stuff. You get, walk in and shake someone's hand, and, nearly as often as we used to be able to do that type of thing. And so I'm curious, if you had a strategy for the types of facilities that you reached out to. Obviously, if you were triangulating the information, would you steer away from certain types of facilities, or and focus on clinics, or did you really just kind of go where the need was and have those conversations with all different types?
yeah, I had conversations with all different types, and in fact, but the script was pretty much the same. So I have, of course, as an OTR, I worked in hands and upper extremity orthopedics, and I worked with pediatrics, and so and then some in home health. So I would tend to gravitate more towards those, but felt comfortable in a couple other settings, and so. Namely, I think the setting kind of got the ball rolling for me in terms of, okay, I really like to go to this state, and I really know, something about this particular company, or I looked it up or what have you, and I'd like to check it out. So that's how that worked. But then there was other times where I team up. I told you I team up with small mom and pop agencies, temporary staffing agencies that had access to VMS.
Right.
And, we'd sit and talk. And they're like, well, we've got some really hard to fill positions. Namely, there was one up in Washington State in the middle of winter, and it was a teeny tiny town. And I said, well, I'd love to talk some more about it. If this is a hard to fill position, it's been open on VMS for a while. Maybe we could strike a deal. And in that position, I was able to offer, a finder's fee for that particular gig, and everyone won out. But I ended up with the net result, the total rate that went along with that. And so, but it's just kind of to think outside the box and how you're going to approach people. And when I can get someone on the phone, and really be able to make a personal connection outside of being a number to HR or just, sharing emails, however you're going to break the ice. But I think what's really important is to have that human connection. And then people can start to develop an idea of who you are, what you represent, and how you might be able to fit into their work equation. And
Right.
that's how I think I kind of got ahead, was making those personal connections in any way possible.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's so important. And I often say to folks that work with us that, go into every cold call with the goal of building a relationship, not landing a contract, because you can hear that the whole conversation will be completely different if your goal is, can I get a contract, versus how do I get to know this person? How do I understand what struggles there are in their unit, or, their rehab clinic, whatever it might be. And then from there, just continue to foster that relationship, because so often, here we are in in an age where cold calling is so difficult. I know from my own personal experience, I've been in sales and business for a long time, that I used to be able to make 10 calls and be able to connect with someone. Then it was 75. Now it's, upwards of 200, before
Mhm.
you could even possibly consider statistically connecting with someone. So if you get someone on the phone, like you said, just keep them on the phone and build that relationship, and then follow up. And so I'd love to know what you think about that, because so often what I find is if someone gets a no, they're like, "Oh, I'm done." And I'm putting that away, and it's like, "Well,
Oh,
wait a
no.
minute." Yeah. Wait.
Yeah, no, especially if I found that there was a connection. There was some kind of either professional or personal conversation that took place in that moment. I'll jot down some notes for myself, and then the follow up, 3 months or 6 months later, or whatever the case might be, just kind of putting a little bug in their ear as to, hey, I'm still available. That way, if it becomes known that there's a need in that particular facility, that rehab director or nursing director or what have you will be like, oh, I got a guy, a gal that will come in and take care of business for us. And so, yeah, it's all about nurturing those relationships and following up with it. I totally
Absolutely.
agree.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'd love to just touch on, you watched the VMS system come into healthcare.
Existence,
And I
yeah.
know it was around like 2004-ish, I believe,
Uh-huh.
maybe something like that. I've heard a couple different numbers, but in that range. And I know ShiftWise and Medifis, it sounds like, were two of the early ones, now both owned by AMN. Um, and so I'd love to hear your, experience prior to the VMS, which sounds like it was, I could call up and get someone. And then when that system came in, and then when it really started to take a foothold in the entire industry, and kind of some of the changes and what you experienced through that transition.
Oh, you're gonna get a kick out of this story then. Okay, so we went over the process by which I was initially, acquiring gigs through different ads and whatnot.
Right.
And so then, I discovered this new, software platform coming out, and VMS, and I'm like, what's this acronym all about, and what's it doing to this industry? I was noticing fewer ads in our publications and more mom and pop agencies popping up,
Mhm.
and at that point, that's when I discovered, through conversation through one of the small agencies, they pretty much gave me the rundown of this new thing called VMS, and they're all about it. And hey, do you want to sign on with us? I'm like, well, okay, yeah, I'll do a gig with you. So I did that particular gig up in Washington that we spoke about earlier. And then I got up there and I'm like, well, if they can do it, maybe I can do it.
Right.
So I call up Medifis and I ask him what the process is of signing up. And he gives me the rundown. I want to say his name is Dave. Forgive me. It's been a number of years. But at that point, I could just call up and talk to the VP.
Right.
They were just all right. There's like 5 of them in the office, right? And And so he gave me the rundown. I went through the entire criteria and sent it in, and and they gave me a membership. So then I was like a kid in a candy store with my own membership.
Wow. Yeah.
And the full VMS list. And I'm like, where do I want to go? It was like a kid in a candy store for any traveler out there. You're like, this is great, and look at these rates. So over time, and I did use that platform numerous times, but then over the course of the next year or two, once the VMS platform had come out, they started to put more stringent rules in per criteria for membership, and then the little guys like me got booted out. But it was fun for a little bit,
Yeah.
It was cool. So yeah, that's how that transpired through my eyes, anyhow.
Yeah. Yeah, it's insane when you look at the history of it. And I love hearing that, like, you could call up the VP of Medifist. Like, we can't even remotely consider what that's like. And, with our system now, with private equity firms owning health systems and, big giants like AMN making billions of dollars a year owning these platforms, and just, how it's, transitioned to where we are now, where we just recently had an experience earlier this year with one of the big ones, Right Sourcing, and their VMS is Wand. And it was it's a parallel situation where they couldn't actually fill the role, right? And we filled it. We're like, we have somebody, and the manager was like, I'd love you to start yesterday, right? When they talked to the clinician. And then it came down to, well, what are the requirements? And they wanted you to be able to have over $2 million in revenue.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought, how arbitrary and strange is that, and what a disconnect. So, like, as you experienced, those requirements started to get more and more difficult, to now where we're at, if you don't fit these particular requirements, which of course are very unlikely for an independent, clinician-owned staffing agency, or even a smaller agency for that matter. In some cases, I'm sure they're doing fairly well depending on how many placements. But and I thought, how crazy is this, that you need a nurse, you found one, but because of a revenue requirement, you're not going to bring them on board. And I thought, man,
thank you, corporate America.
Yeah, it's so frustrating. And obviously we tried a bunch of different avenues, but at the end of the day, they rather have those requirements met than meet the needs of the patient, is the way that I look at that, which to me,
amen. Yeah, that steps on some toes right there.
Yeah, good. Because that's what we're trying to disrupt,
Of
right?
course,
Is kind of put the power back, not only in the clinicians' hands, who are the heartbeat of healthcare, but also, hey, there's a patient at the end of this, and we care about them, and so do you guys, because that's why you got into the field. So I know I get all fired up, so I will simmer down on all that.
Me too. I'm kind of egging that on over here.
Yeah,
because it's part of the passion that we both share. And the conversations that we've had in the past, is it's embracing that passion for what we do, but also encouraging entrepreneurship, because there's really no other reason for the guy in the middle to be there. There really isn't. And so that's the joy of this journey, is finding a solution, because we're so strongly being held back by the higher power right now, right? And you know what, though, perseverance, is, I think, everything, and I can see it in you guys, so that's great.
Thanks.
Yeah, totally.
Thank you. So, Mike, we've had such a great afternoon, and I am so excited that I got to spend some time with you. It's always such a pleasure, and it's always so encouraging. And I think that's so important. One of our foundations, just to empower each other, right? Because we need that in order to keep going. So thank you for that. And I'd love for you to just share, some final words of wisdom, with all of your experience and all of your passion that you have, and continue to have, for the industry and for this disruption and empowerment of clinicians. what would be those words of wisdoms to folks that are thinking about doing this or who are on the journey, but maybe getting discouraged or wherever they might be?
Well, I'll back up to that last statement I made, and perseverance is everything. But if you're truly passionate about independence and you're truly passionate about carving your way independently in an industry that is just devoured by middlemen,
Yeah.
if you have just as much drive to do that as you do taking care of your patients, then I'm here to tell you that you can, whatever you apply yourself to, you can get done. And you can get done through the resources, that we're learning here with EmpoweRx has to help you get it done. So, I wish I had that luxury back in the day. But again, like I said earlier, coming full circle, that's the beauty of technology and bringing people together and, and learning about the process. But you can do it. Just, keep that drive and keep asking questions. That was a big one for me. So
Absolutely. I love that. Yeah, always want to keep learning. And I think that's a foundation for any clinician, right? Because things are always changing. So that's great. Great words of wisdom. Well, thank you so much again, Mike. We really appreciate you and paving the way as a trailblazer and continuing to interact with all of the folks on our Facebook groups to give your experience and words of encouragement. We really appreciate that because that is a time that you could be doing other things, when we're on the internet, and just shows your commitment and passion to that. So I just want to really give you some appreciation for all of the time that you spend doing that. And obviously, we will look forward to staying connected to you for a long time coming.
Very much so. Thank you so much, MK.